Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Thanks to Capital One, our sponsor here at South by Southwest, where we're doing podcasts live from the Capital One house at Antone's. Hey, it's Alex Williams, the New Stack here at Capital One House, South by Southwest with Lorinda Brandon. Hello, Lorinda.
Hello, Alex. I'm good. How are you?
Good to see you.
It's good to see you.
And Lorinda is an API expert, generally an open source leader, I would say, especially in the Capital One community. You've been in this world for, some time. Tell me about your own experiences, just so we get a level set on your background, who you are, what you've done over the years, and what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in technology, I probably should mumble how many years.
Yeah, we both mumble.
Yeah, more than 30 years.
Awesome.
I come from a background where I was involved with a lot of open source products. From working with APIs back in the day when the web was new.
Right.
So, this is kind of I've been watching this era kind of evolve over time, and when I came to join Capital One, it was because I knew a lot of people who were already working in the Capital One technology side, and they were doing such cool stuff. So before that, I was working at Smart Bear Software, and I was working on products like Soap UI and Swagger, and so deeply involved in both API and open source.
Right.
So this was kind of a sweet spot for me.
Yeah.
And I loved coming over here and kind of being part of the beginning of the journey, and now watching it grow and expand, and watching the Capital One culture embrace all of this. It's been just a lot of fun.
That's really cool. That's really, really cool. And we're going to talk about the work at Capital One right now, and the theme for our discussion really is about disruption.
Yeah.
And really the need to go through disruption for any organization, and about your guys' journey through that, and how you treat APIs really as products.
Yeah.
And that requires a different kind of a thinking. Tell us a little bit about this disruption process, and when the kind of the core, themes you think about when you think about disruption. Yeah,
so disruption, I think a lot of people think of disruption as a sudden event, right? Oh my God, it's overnight, something amazing happens.
Right.
Disruption really, especially in a big corporation, is slow.
Yes.
It's an evolution.
Right.
And so I think when we talk about disruption, we're talking about, we're sort of looking down the road.
Right.
Where do we as Capital One want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And that means sort of disrupting some of the mindset now so that we can achieve that later.
Wow. That's a long road. I guess it makes sense, though, because if you're thinking about the product life cycle, there's the introduction.
Right. There's
growth.
There's not just all of that, but there's also understanding what does it mean when you say an API is a product.
Yeah.
Right? So at Capital One, there's a ton of APIs, most of which are internal. So what we're trying to do internally is get people to look at those APIs and say, what can we put external?
Right.
And what does it mean to take an API and make it an external product?
Right.
What's involved in that? And there's a little bit of we talked about this morning in our morning session. For a lot of product owners, they're used to thinking about products with interfaces.
Right.
So when you say to them, hey, let's build an API, they don't know where to start. That's a technical concept to them.
Right.
So what we try to do inside Capital One, what my team tries to do, is get people to understand there's nothing to be afraid of. It's a product.
Right.
Define the requirements, right? Let's work with the technical teams to make those requirements come to life, and let's market it, let's document it, let's evangelize it, and let's work with partners to adopt it, right? And iterate. So partners will tell us what they like and what they don't like. We'll hear from the market, and we can evolve as we go.
So how do you define the work of your teams? How do you set the parameters for those teams, and how do you create like these cross-functional environments?
So a lot of it is we have in the API sort of core team on DevExchange, we have product managers who understand how to take an API through the life cycle.
Right.
We work with the lines of business to help
Right.
them also understand what it takes. We have shared resources like tech writers, and so what
Right.
we do is we basically add people to the core functional team and say, you know, here's a tech writer who can help you. Here's marketing who can help you, and we become sort of adjunct team members for them.
How does that become part of the disruptive process itself? How does that become disruptive?
So it changes the mindset, right? They learn as they go. They learn from us. We learn from them. And as we bring these APIs to market, there is a disruption in how Capital One looks at their own set of internal APIs, right? There's a disruption in how they look at their business model.
Right.
You know, it's not just about customers who are, you know, getting one of our credit cards or opening a bank account. Our customers now include developers.
Right.
That's a whole other sort of set of target audience
Right.
for Capital One.
Right, they're stakeholders.
Exactly. They're
Right.
stakeholders. They're customers that we have to understand and build things for and listen to and engage. So it's a whole other kind of, it's a mental shift.
So how does the process you now use for developing APIs compare to how, you know, it had been done before? You had kind of built kind of this, you know, these concepts around the team building and the development of the API as a product.
So I think we have a much more holistic view of an API now. There's an understanding that right from the beginning, you need to have sample code, you need to have reference apps, you need to have technical documentation. So there's more of it's a broader view. It's not just, oh, I have an open API definition and I have an API that functions. And what we need to do is also build all of the collateral that goes around that and build all of the assets that you need in order to bring a product to market. It's just like bringing a product to market.
Yeah, and you're bringing it to market for developers, so
Yeah.
you have to help them solve the problems that they have. So you need to
Exactly.
be thinking about problem solving, don't you?
Yes, and not just, you have to let go a little bit of what that interface is, right?
Right.
So you're trying to give them capabilities that let
Right.
them build bigger, better products.
Right.
And so it's thinking about your product as being something that can be turned into some other product.
Right.
So that's part of the education that we go through with the teams
Right.
inside Capital One.
Right.
But it's also, you know, we have a whole group that is developer marketing now.
Right.
Because that's a different target market.
Right.
You have to speak to them differently and engage them differently, and so that's what we do.
And so we're talking about helping developers solve the problems that they have, right? And also part of this then is really thinking about the full ecosystem, you know, that they're a part of, or the entire, really the work that they do and how they get their work done. And often that involves open source projects, right? And
Right.
so that really does lead to new thinking about open source and how you think about open source.
Yeah, totally. So at Capital One, we embrace the whole open source philosophy, the culture, everything.
Right.
So we use a lot of open source in our own environment.
Right.
We also build a lot of tools ourselves for our own development work. And we're eager to open source the ones that don't have any IP involved, right, that we want to evolve with the community at large. So what we've done, because DevExchange itself
Yeah.
has a target market of developers. This is what we're good at, is talking to developers and exposing things to developers. So what we have done is brought the open source tools that we've built into the DevExchange family.
Okay.
So that's where, like if you want to go see all the open source projects that we have, and we have DevOps tools and dev tools, we have big data projects. If you want to see all of those, you go to DevExchange, and they live side by side with our API products.
I see.
And we also are big, I mentioned OpenAPI before. We use OpenAPI to write our API definitions. And we are on we're members of the OpenAPI initiative. Okay. So we're engaged in all of that as well. So we look at open source as a way to truly innovate, both internally as well as participating externally.
And a point that got brought up this week that I thought really is pertinent is how open source technologies allow for software integration. And so with open source technologies, it makes it easier to integrate.
Yeah.
And so that just becomes almost like a necessary part of building out, distributed applications, really, which we're seeing a lot more of, right?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that we've done with some of our bigger open source tools is made sure there's an API as part of that, so that it's easy for you to integrate our tools into your ecosystem, and for you to innovate against it, using your own thoughts and needs and all of that, so you can integrate, you either help contribute to the code that's actually the core code of the open source project, or integrate through the API.
Interesting. How does that help when we're seeing such fast innovation in the market? The discussion here is a lot about machine learning. It's a lot about AI. The APIs have to keep up with that, right?
Yeah.
They have to be able to be more automated.
Yep.
They have to be, you have to be thinking. It makes you really, I think, you must have to really focus on the product and what it is and how you've defined it, and then evolve accordingly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of that is really a matter of having this constant feedback loop, which we take very seriously. So we want to keep track of how people are using our APIs, what they're looking for that we didn't build, what we built that nobody wants. We want to make sure that we hear that constantly, and we can shift as needed.
And that then speaks to the continuous feedback loop and continuous disruption.
Exactly. And we're here to build APIs that developers want. Right. So we have to keep listening to what they're saying and what the feedback is that they're giving us. And then we go back into the business and have those conversations internally to say, what do we want to do next? How do we build our roadmap? So
that speaks then to like a little bit James was talking to me about, how you really need to think about the consumption of the API, the technical aspects of the API, the functionality of the API.
And not just the API, but the platform itself. So, we want to make sure that the portal we're delivering, the platform technology that we're delivering, speaks to what developers need. So one of the things, for example, that we've learned, and it was in, part of what James was talking about earlier too, which is developers want to try things out. And one of the things we learned along the way is they actually want to try things out pretty early on before they've adopted the API. So we give them a sandbox so that they can integrate when they're actually building an app. But sometimes they just want to make calls and see the payload, right? So we also give them a try it out feature so they can go in and use our playground and just get a sense of the API, because that's what they told us they wanted. So there's sort of this constant feedback, not just on the APIs, but how we deliver the APIs.
So how do you reach out to the developers? What is that process you go through, you must have existing relationships, right?
Yep.
You know a lot of people, but do you guys try to follow any kind of workflow so people who maybe are new to the team, right? But they have to still, find these stakeholders Do you follow guys? Do you follow?
Yeah,
any way?
so one of the
Any
things that
workflow?
we do as part of the core group is we have a developer council.
Yeah.
So we have sort of an advisory board, right?
Ah.
We want people to tell us, here's some ideas that we have, here's our roadmap, and get some advice up front. But we also run a bunch of workshops. So we
Sure.
go around the country and we host workshops with developers and we ask them, and sometimes we're just throwing up ideas that we're kicking around internally and we say, we think this might be a cool API. What do you think, right? And we get their feedback. We understand. We'll investigate things like business models. Would you pay for that API? Would you want to have limited access to the API? We can get a lot of information that feeds into that roadmap exercise for us.
Interesting. So going forward, with you guys' disruption, really. You have a product definition really in place for how you develop those products and how you develop, as APIs. What is the, this is a continuous, iteration, but what are some of the things you're thinking about moving forward in the next year or so?
So I can't talk too much about what's in our roadmap, but we are looking at, we launched a bank account starter API.
Right.
It was our first banking API. We have other banking API ideas, and so we're kind of fleshing those out to see where we go from there.
To just keep on pushing out the API.
Yeah, we want to push the envelope on some of the things that we've put out there already, things like identity services and banking. And then we're also looking at, we're listening again to our external developer audience to see what it is that resonates with them. Some of the API ideas that we have, in fact, most of them, we like to test them out with partners. So, we've talked quite a bit here at South by about some of the integrations we've done with partners. We want to see how those float for a while, So that's kind of where we are as far as, we're definitely expanding our portfolio this year. And we have a few ideas in the works, but we always want to hear more. So honestly, anybody who's listening to this, if you have ideas, contact us on DevExchange because we want to hear them.
Okay, maybe you can just tell us the URL.
Oh, you think? Developer.capitalone.com. And there's feedback on every single page. There's a feedback widget because we want to hear from people no matter where they are on the site. So there's no problem finding us and talking to us.
Lorinda, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today. It's been a lot of fun to talk about your disruption. It's always nice to get together and chat a bit about this whole world we're in. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it.
Thanks to Capital One, our sponsor here at South by Southwest, where we're doing podcasts live from the Capital One house at Antone's.